Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to episode number 1 of What's in the Word podcast. I am Anthony AJ Joyner.
And I'm Steve Canal.
And so what we want to do on the What's in the Word podcast, Steve, we want to break down how we're going to approach this?
Absolutely. So to start off, each month, we're going to select one book that AJ and I highly recommend and give our review. We're going to give basically the cliff notes to the book, but from a professional standpoint, professional development standpoint. We're going to pull out the elements that we feel you should grasp and hold on to and embrace to making you a better person. Or it could be, methodologies that you can incorporate to growing your business or growing within a professional setting in corporate America.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And the premise is, we know that everybody out there is busy and everybody's doing a lot of things. So we wanted to take our time to read a book that we thought would be helpful and break it down for you so that you didn't have to. All right. So instead of you going out and reading as many books as Steve and I love to read and kind of immerse ourselves into, we're going to read it and break it down so that you can just listen to the What's in a Word podcast and you can get our review of the book. So the first book, I'm going to do a drum roll. Drums, please. The first book for the first episode. Steve, what's the first book, brother?
Can't Hurt Me by David Goggins.
Love it. Love it. And the subtitle is Master Your Mind and Defy the Odds. So, Steve, I'm going to toss it over to you and we'll get this thing started. So, kind of high-level overview. What did you think about the book? And we don't have to give it a rating now, but just overall, looking back on it, what would you say about the book?
For a person like myself who prides myself in mental toughness, this was mental toughness times 100.
Woo.
This was mental toughness on another level. When you talk about locking in and, to use his word, callousing your mind to overcome, this is a perfect example of, I know a lot of people say, hey, they go through things in life. We all go through things in life. But the things that this man had to endure from a young age and family, the challenges he faced as a teenager and young adult, taking all that energy and transforming it into positivity and something amazing through his offerings of his YouTube posts, social media to this book, it's unmatched. So for me, I definitely appreciated his journey, what he's been through, and the ability to not feel sorry for himself and give everybody those tools to incorporate into their life to achieve just as he did.
Absolutely. And one of the things that when you talk about mental toughness, it's at an entirely different level. And I think the most impressive thing was he went through Navy SEAL training, 3 times before he finally went through the third time. This guy went through Navy SEAL training 3 times. Now, most people don't even make it through Navy SEAL training once. He went through 3 times. And you talk about callousing your mind. I think the last time that he went through, his ankle was broken, or at least it was so badly injured that he literally had to tape it up every single day and pop pain pills just to make it through. So you talk about mental toughness, that's at an entirely different level. So let's dig a little bit into some of the things that he talked about. So in summary, life is unfair, and we all know that, right? But what David Goggins says that really stands out to me is that the sooner you can accept the fact that life is unfair, the sooner you can start to prepare mentally and psychologically your ability to conquer it. And you have to have what he said was a can't hurt me mentality. So essentially, no matter what you're against, you have to mentally tell whatever that obstacle, job, situation, whatever it is, you have to stare it in the face and say, this can't hurt me. and then you do whatever you have to do to survive that situation.
And that's a great, way to kick this off, because, one thing that stood out that he said in relation to that was being at a disadvantage freed him to create an indestructible mental toolbox, by, with everything that he's been through, and facing and understanding those disadvantages. It gave him the tools to overcome, and it came from practice and repetition. It came from him having to deal with things over and over and over and over again through life, up until he faced those challenges and understood that, I need to create, a toolbox mentally to put me in a position to face these and overcome whenever they do come. And it came from him acknowledging that life isn't fair, and there are disadvantages.
Absolutely. And one of the things that his first turning points that I remember in the book was it's what he coined the accountability mirror. And so, in his words, he would look in the mirror at himself and he would point out his flaws in the most curt and direct way. So he would look at himself and say, "You're fat," or "You're a fat ass," or whatever it was. And then he would write on the mirror, like, whatever he had to do to conquer what that flaw was. So when he decided that he was going to lose weight, he started running, he started eating right, he started working out. And every day when he looked in the mirror, he tried to have as frank of a conversation with himself as possible so that he could, number one, point out all of the flaws, because you can't really deal with it until, again, we mentioned this earlier, until you point it out, right? So I think that was really impactful and it stood out.
A lot of times, there are those who try to pretend as if that person they see in the mirror is somebody else. And then there are people like David Goggins who, at that critical point in his life where things were going bad and he was pretending to be somebody he wasn't every day, to the point where, he was about to get kicked out of school. He was flunking, he was failing. And he looked himself in the mirror and had to be real with himself. And he had to stop bullshitting the reality, that was. And the more that he doubled down on pretending to be, the more his life crumbled, because he wasn't doing the hard work to put himself in a position to succeed, because he wasn't facing those realities. You know what I'm saying? He wasn't facing those realities. So it was cool to see that point in his life where life made sense. Where it's like, I don't care what the people that don't even like me, I'm trying to appease them and dress up a certain way and talk a certain way just so they could think I'm cool. Like, I don't mess with them. They don't even like me. And when he finally realized that, that's when, he went to school, and instead of trying to sit at the cool table, he sat at his own table, ate his own lunch. He knew what his purpose was at that point, and he was working towards that every day. So I greatly appreciate that. And it was, so, another cool quote that he said is, you have to own your life. And at that moment, I think that's when he began to own his life, because everything that was happening before was happening and he didn't know why. But now it's like he's putting himself in a position to be prepared to succeed by owning his life.
And another thing that dovetails perfectly into that is something that he said that I never really heard anybody say before. And he said that your mind has every advantage over you because your mind knows all of your insecurities, it knows all of your flaws, it knows what to show you instead of what you're supposed to do. For example, he said that he loved basketball, right? But when he decided, like Steve said, to take control of his life, he literally didn't pick up a basketball for 20 years because he said he used basketball as an escape or as an excuse to go play as opposed to focus on what he was focusing on. And I think we all kind of fall into that. We have the things that we know we're supposed to do. And as we start to make excuses and justify our behaviors, i.e., eating the wrong foods or doing things like that, those are kind of our comfort things that we do. So he says your mind automatically knows that. So in order for you to beat your mind, you have to callous your mind so that
Yeah.
it can't impact you.
And to your point with comfort, his comfort was basketball, but for a lot of people that comfort is food. You know,
Hmm.
ice cream. It can be, things that are further putting you in a hole because those things aren't good for you. But we consume them because it's like it makes us feel better, right? But he knew that he couldn't put himself in that position, purposely putting himself in that comfort place, which was the basketball court, which made him, for a brief moment, forget about his problems and his issues and not face them. Right. So by him taking basketball away, he took his comfort zone away and had to face reality and create solution. And, I loved the part where he talked about callousing your mind, and for me that can go twofold. Some people can see it as a negative, as your is almost like drugs, where you take a drug that's masking the pain, you know but the beauty of how he talked about callousing your mind, it's putting yourself in a position to do things that you don't want to do, which is the key, right? So it's not just masking it, it's not taking a drug to mask the pain. He's callousing his mind enough to put himself in positions to do things that he's not comfortable doing. And I'll use myself as an example. When I first joined corporate America, I had to put myself in positions that I was uncomfortable doing because, one, I wasn't of, that industry. So I had to learn that industry. I had to put myself in positions that were uncomfortable to learn how to be comfortable in those situations, right? Whether it was sending out mass emails to leadership, getting in front of, our customers and selling in a plan, things that as an entrepreneur and you do yourself, you're not really put in those positions all the time, right? So I had to put myself in uncomfortable situations in order to be comfortable doing it, to learn the good and the bad, the strengths and the weaknesses that I had, confront them, and make them all strengths.
Absolutely. And one of the things about being in those uncomfortable situations, what he talked about that I absolutely appreciate him pointing out, and I'd heard this before, but not in the way that he did it. So he said, you control the things that you can control so that it prepares you for the thing, or it prepares you to control the things you can't control. And here's the example that he used. He said every morning he was very intentional. He would get up, he would make up his bed, and this is after he decided to change his life. So he started with tiny things. So he would make up his bed, he would shave his hair every day. He said he ran 8 miles a day, so that those are the things that he could control. Because once you go out into the world, things are going to happen that you can't control. But now you've built that habit of figuring out a way to push through, even when it's uncomfortable. You build a habit of success. So when you're approached with different things that you haven't been able to accomplish yet, or different challenges, your mentality is a little different because now you have a bunch of wins that you've built up on, and it makes it a little bit easier for you to face challenges that you can't control.
When I do my one-on-one sessions or, professional development sessions with my clients, I always have them acknowledge small wins. I think that's something that we overlook. We look for the grandmaster prize, but the small wins are steps. Every day you should be doing something to get you closer to where you're trying to be, and acknowledging those small wins or putting habits in place to remind you of what you're working towards are key. Shaving his head every day, and shaving, his beard and his mustache. It reminded him of his ultimate goal was, to be a part of the military. So he was incorporating daily tactics or daily things that the soldiers would do as if he was in the military already. So mentally he was prepared to be in that position. So that was very key and a great point. Another thing that he talked about that I really appreciated, when you talk about social media strategy or things that are working, to triple down on those things, right? And yes, you should. When you've done the due diligence to understand a strategy that you're putting in play, and you're getting a positive response, you did the due diligence, you did the work. So you should double down on it because it got a positive response. But something that I appreciated that he said also was you need to triple down on your weaknesses as well. You need to identify what needs to be worked on, and stop having a victim's mentality as if the world is just crushing on you or coming at you, because there are disadvantages. But if you are you going to be the one to sit back and do nothing about it, or are you going to be the one to acknowledge that there are, but not allow that to put you in a position of a victim and double down on that to make it a strength? The way you do that is putting yourself in a position to succeed, right? So there's the victim, and you could sit back and be like, hey, this world is against me, and I'm never going to be able to achieve. Or you can say, all right, there are some disadvantages, but there are things that I can take advantage of to be great. So I'm going to put myself in those positions to allow greatness to happen. So I appreciated that point he made in the book.
So I agree with that on the in the example that you just explained it. But I also this is where I take a little bit of a departure, because I know that there are people, especially when I was in corporate America, when I know that my strength is ideation, brainstorming, creative problem solving. My strength is not organization per se, right? It's creative, it's organization from a high level, but it's not detail oriented type of organization, right? So I think while I agree with what he said about finding your weaknesses and tripling down on them, I think that there's another approach that you can take depending on what level you are in your career or what the situation is when you identify a weakness, you hire somebody that's their strength. So that way, if you're focusing on your genius zone, that's what I like to call your genius zone, and then you hire somebody in those positions, that's those are their strengths too. When it comes to like running a business per se, I think that gives you an advantage. But what he was saying, I think he was speaking more in the physical sense of the word, because he knew, for one of the examples he said was he wasn't a great swimmer,
Right.
right? So he forced himself to get in the water every single day until he could conquer the fear, because it was totally mental. So he forced himself to face that fear every day until he could do it better. So I think in the physical aspect, or when there are things that you're accomplishing that are more physical, yes, if you're a point guard or you have great ball handling skills, excuse me, then maybe you want to work on your 3-point shot or work on your jump shot. But I think in context of business, there are ways that you can outsource and hire to shore up those weaknesses. What do you think about that, Steve?
Oh, I agree 100%. And everything with context, right? So
Correct.
what is, what we share and what we talk about definitely needs context to definitely, bring to life what words actually mean sometimes, And to your point, in business, especially today, with all the technology that's available, if you're not an amazing writer and you want to do a blog, or you want to write a book, there are opportunities for you to tap into that weakness and get a ghostwriter or get writers. And some people are better at talking their thoughts and being able than actually writing it out. To your point, being able to tap into that weakness and bring it to light is definitely an option. But again, on the flip side, when you're talking about David Goggins and knowing who he is and what he's been through, you know, weakness is internal. Is what he's trying to draw out, because he was in the Air Force, he was in the Marines. Like, these aren't easy things to do. You have to physically test, to not only mentally, physically test to actually be a part of our military. So he knew he had weaknesses. He was over 300 pounds, and he needed to be 195 pounds, 196 pounds to qualify for his height to be able to join the Marines. So he had a lot of work to do, right?
Absolutely.
He knew that his weaknesses were going to his mom's house, eating a half a pound of bacon, eating, six, pastry dishes and everything else that a mom would give you when you visit. He had to cut that out to be able to, cut that weight, and those weaknesses. And he drew them out. He faced them and doubled down on making sure he was able to cut that out. So in here, he talks about how failing is too much to handle, so most people don't try. And that is so on point. You know how many people, the hardest thing of starting a business is that first step. A lot of people don't try to start a business, or don't try for that promotion, or don't try, and ask, that male or female out on a date because of fear of failure.
Hmm.
They don't want to go through that hurt. They don't want to go through that pain, especially today. A lot of people can't face failure or negativity that comes towards them, and you see it through social media, through comments. A comment, you can have 1,000 positive comments. The moment one person leaves one negative comment, people don't know how to handle it. People will go crazy. They'll forget about those 1,000 positive comments and just feel as if I failed at life. It might not even be negative. It might go against the grain of what you thought or what you think or your opinion.
And you see that so much on social media, right? Where people will, in the comment section, they're not even arguing the point, they're arguing to be right. Or they're
And
arguing for the last word. Again, you talked about context earlier. I don't pay attention anymore, but when I did, I would literally see people arguing with each other, and they would eventually be agreeing on the same thing, but it was almost like they were positioning to have the last word or show who was the smartest. So they would both Google different articles to support their point. And I'm like, what is the point? Right. So, yeah. And there's one other thing I want to talk about on that. So, you remember the concept that he had of the cookie jar?
yes.
Absolutely love that concept. So, here's how David Goggins explains getting through hardships. Number one, realize that you have been through hardships before. And every time you accomplish something that you set out to do that was a hardship, you put it in a mental cookie jar. So that way, say for example, if I've run a 5K before, and I know there's another 5K coming up, and I'm not a great runner, in my mental cookie jar, I have that feeling of me crossing the line in my last 5K, which lets me know that, okay, I'm up against this thing, but I've had success in the past, and I can have it again.
There are physical things that we can do. And when I say that, meaning that you can physically see and acknowledge that we should be doing every day, that reminds us of those wins, of those small wins, or uh, understanding that you're taking one step forward, right? Or two steps forward. And I equate that to writing lists for me, you know. Um, when I have a list of things that I need to accomplish that day, or goals that I need to accomplish that day, I cross them out on a physical piece of paper, because that feeling is similar to the cookie jar of crossing out an item on the to-do list lets me know that I'm one step closer, and I actually took the time to work on something that was important enough for me to write down to accomplish. So those things that you can do to remind yourself of accomplishment, or taking a positive step, it's always good to do.
Absolutely. And another point that I love is where he says 100% responsibility, 100% accountability. So it doesn't matter, gay, straight, man, woman, from the hood, from a rich place, rich family background, uh, rich, poor, whatever the situation is, everybody has mental garbage that they deal with. So the kid that grows up in the rich family, they feel like they always have to live in the shadows of their parents. Where the kid in the poor that grew up in the hood, he feels like, oh, he has to fight against the streets. Or the person that's gay feels like he's always being discriminated against because of his sexual preference. Everybody has stuff. So essentially, no matter what your stuff is, it's not an excuse. You can use it as an excuse, but if there's anybody that's ever done anything from the circumstance that you're in, then you have the ability to do that same thing. I love that.
To your point, definitely we all have our things, everybody. But it's not for me to say what I go through is harder than what you go through,
Correct.
or it's acknowledging what I'm going through, facing that up, and knowing what my situation is and dealing with my situation. I don't like not looking at you because you went through that you have to listen to what I went through because it was hard and it was harder than what you went through. Like, we all have our own issues. I don't know how you felt going through that situation. I need to understand where you come from. I need to acknowledge that and know that you do have your issues as well. But I'm not going to use that as a crutch against you.
Absolutely. And I think it's in one of the later chapters where he talks about the best way to continue to achieve is to stay in pursuit. So, and you see that a lot in business owners and in athletes and things like that. So, let's just stay with the athlete reference. When you win a championship, that's not the end, right? Now you have to go out and defend your championship to win another one. So it literally never stops. So, and I just had this conversation earlier this week where I once said things like, I remember first after college, I was like, man, if I could ever make it to six figures, my life will be great. And that's all I need is $100,000. You and that's a young 20-something-year-old mind. And then once I did that, I was like, whoa, wait a minute, this is not. Now I need 150. And then when I got there, I was like, wait a minute, so it is understanding. And I think as I've gotten older, I realized that it's not necessarily the goal. The goal is just the checkpoint. It's the pursuit. Like, you become a different person in the pursuit process. So in order for me to step out on my own, I had to become a different person with a different mindset of, being in a job and knowing that every other week I got a check coming to me, regardless. So I think the pursuit is what you have to understand that you need to enjoy and master.
Yeah, and that's the journey of life. The saying that I usually use: you have that beginning date when you're born and the date at the end, right? That dash in the middle is the pursuit. That's the life, right? That was life. You're born at one point and you're not here anymore at the end. That dash in the middle was the life. And how many people sit back and appreciate that dash? You're running so much for that end point, and that once you get there, it's like, all right, now what? Right? But when you appreciate life, you know how to continue to go and move forward. We know some of the richest people in the world who are the most miserable people in the world.
Oh my God. Yeah.
Their main goal was to become billionaires and millionaires. And
Hmm.
once they got there, they on their journey to get there, they forgot how to live, because all you knew was that pursuit and that end goal that you had in your mind, But the journey is very, very important. So, remembering that is key. Another thing that, earlier in the book that I really appreciated: as adults, a lot of times we don't remember, or not even remember, we don't think about the things that impacted us as youth that are impacting us now as adults, right? So there was a point where he talked about how toxic stress does more damage to kids than polio and meningitis, and how that can lead to learning disabilities and social anxiety limits, and how it limits language and development, and can impact memory. So the most gifted kid can be impacted by this through toxic stress.
Absolutely. And while you were talking about that, I wanted to go a little bit deeper in that to kind of define what toxic stress is. So I just did looked it up really quickly. And it says toxic stress can occur when a child experiences strong, frequent, and or prolonged adversity, such as physical or emotional abuse, chronic neglect, caregiver, substance abuse, mental illness, exposure to violence, and or accumulated burdens of family economic hardship without adequate adult support. So, it can happen from children being exposed to extenuating circumstances for an extended period of time. And it plays out in different ways. And he talked about how he developed the stuttering habit, not because he stuttered, but because his life had been so stressful. And then, when we talk about being he was the only Black kid in a school in one of the extremely racist counties in Indiana, and getting picked on all the time. And then they labeled him as a special needs child, even though he wasn't that wasn't the situation. He was just under stress.
Right.
So he literally stopped talking to the teacher, or he wouldn't answer her because he was afraid that he would stutter. And as a result, he got moved into slow classes, and his mom eventually took him out. But that was all due to toxic stress that he was exposed to as a child. So
Right.
that's definitely a thing.
Think about, children growing up in underserved neighborhoods
Hmm.
and what they have to experience every day. You have rappers like Meek Mill who are talking about, I suffer from PTSD because, post traumatic stress, because I've seen my friends get shot. There are factors for why kids are the way they are, and that's a deeper look. We'll save that for another conversation or another time, but I just wanted to just top surface touch on that's just one example.
One example of
One
many, many,
example
many.
that leads to proven facts that
Sure.
we talked about that it leads to disorders, learning disabilities, and it's real.
Absolutely. And I think, again, even with that one example, we could really go down a path on that one. But these are things that people go through. And then, when they come out on the other side and it goes undiagnosed, it can definitely cause other problems in the future as it relates to incarceration and crime and all these other things that play out. So just, I thought it was very important that, well, I'm glad, Steve, that you brought it up, and I want to go a little bit deeper because we all, at some level, deal with stress. But I think at a certain level, some people have extreme circumstances of stress, which makes it that much harder to develop. So,
Something that he said in the book that ties to that so eloquently is, he says many people are born broken, having to deal with certain situations at an early age and fighting to fix, but not using. And what you learn from him throughout this book is he didn't sit back and just cry in a corner because he was facing these issues. He
hmm
did something about it, and what he did, which I feel is one of the most amazing stories and of overcoming, was phenomenal. And another thing that he said that kind of uh, embodied and encompassed everything and presented it in a way was he said to find peace he had to face his life and fix it.
I think that's a pretty good. Oh, did we talk about taking souls?
No, we didn't. I think that'll be a good way to bring this home.
To wrap it up. So David Goggins, and again, this is a guy who's a Army Ranger. He's a Navy SEAL. He went through SEAL training 3 times. Uh, he is one of the top ultra marathon runners in the world right now. I think he's actually the top ultra marathon runners. And if you don't know what that means you run marathons that are over 100 miles. This guy's run a 200-mile marathon. So I'm in Atlanta right now. Uh, Columbus, Georgia is exactly 99 miles from Atlanta. So I would literally have to run to Columbus and back. Still have a couple more miles. So to put it in context, this is the kind of mentality that this guy has. And he ran his first 100-mile marathon, or I don't know if it was his very first, Steve, when he talked about that one with his where he passed out and he had to sit down and they literally had to kind of bring him back to, and he still kept going. He didn't quit with his ankles, like he was literally bleeding out of his butt. He was bleeding, rectal bleeding. Um, so this guy is definitely a tough guy, and most people aren't, that mentally tough. But he talks about this concept of taking souls, and here's what he means: whatever it is that you're up against, which we kind of did talk about, at least a part of it, you have to look at that thing and say, not only am I going to conquer whatever this thing is, whether it's a job, it's a goal, it's a whatever it is, but you have to say, I'm going to take its soul, take its soul. And what he means by that is not only are you going to do it, but you're going to do it with such excellence that whatever was standing in front of you now has an appreciation of the way that you did it. So you overcome and conquer, but you do it with excellence.
That's passion.
Absolutely, absolutely. So I guess in wrapping it, we have our review system. So a lot of people give books stars. We give them fists. We give them power fists. um, I would definitely recommend reading this book. I think this is definitely a machismo book. It's definitely a guy's book, and I'm not saying that women wouldn't enjoy it, but I think a lot of times, and David Goggins, when I read this book or listened to it on audio, I felt like at times it was pain for pain's sake, right? So, for example, when he ran the 100-mile marathon that we talked about, where he had the rectal bleeding, he ran like an extra 2 miles, just to like Steve just said, just to go above and beyond and put his foot in it, right? So, while I do agree in doing things in excellence, I think that some of his examples, just based on the type of person he is, he a lot of his approach was unnecessarily painful, but that was his way of doing it. So I don't know if that way would apply to everybody else. Steve, did you have anything that you stood out as yeah, but
Following up on what you said, I definitely think it was a machismo book. But at the same time, not saying that this book isn't for everybody.
sure,
Uh, but in the context of how he says things and how aggressive he is, he can be overly
absolutely,
in his approach. Because I know just in conversation, sometimes if a curse word blurts out or something blurts out, my wife might look at me a certain way. Not to say she can't
yeah,
handle
mine too,
like
mine
like
too.
this conversation, did you really have to go that far and say that word? And to me, it might have been in that moment, in that context, but understanding the full scope in my approach, I know that I had to approach it a little bit different in order to make it appealing for everybody. So I agree, with that. It was heavily aggressive, but I think in order to understand and grasp everything that he's actually gone through, he had to take it there. He went through a lot in his journey in his life, and I think he wanted people to connect with that. So that's what the aggressive tone and sound was like. And the reason why we're saying this is because, each time we do this review, it's going to be of an audio book. And the beauty of this audio book as well is he added elements to it. So it wasn't just reading the book like in the physical form. In the audio version, he actually uh, does another element of a podcast style where the person who's actually reading the audio book, who you hear reading the book, he'll talk to at the end of each chapter to bring more body and context to the book, which was cool. So that's another element, when we do these reviews, to say, hey, the bonus about getting the audio version of this book is you're actually going to get to hear him speak at the end of each chapter and hear his words, which was really cool. Another element I like. So for me, I don't know, AJ, if you're ready to throw the fist up.
Let me just say, there's one other thing that I thought was definitely on the back end of the machismo. All throughout the book, because he is a soldier and he was a soldier, just about every reference that he makes after his childhood, or actually from the point that he decided to turn his life around, every reference was to war, right? He said, "You go to war with yourself. You callous your brain. Life is pain." I don't think that life is pain, like all the way to that extreme, but I think that there are painful events in life that you have to overcome. I think another thing he said is being the best is shallow, because he said um, becoming the best is shallow. You just want to continue to become better and better and better. So I don't necessarily agree with that, because you can definitely be at the top of your game and still achieve, and I don't think it's necessarily shallow. So, Steve, I'm ready to throw up the fist, man. I think if you had to summarize it, how would you summarize the whole thing, just in a sentence or two?
Well, I don't want to say motivation because he absolutely hates the word motivation.
He does.
He feels that any bad day can wither away motivation, and you could be motivated after reading the book, but you have to dig deeper into what it is you're trying to accomplish in order to uh, have it become a part of life. So I would say this was definitely a book that I was happy I was able to consume. I think that his story is unmatched, of what he's gone through from elementary school to being an adult and everything in between, to the point where he doesn't feel sorry about it for the life he lived. He embraced every moment, he acknowledged every moment, and became a better man because of it. And took that to put it into the world to help other people, um, face life and the issues they have going on with themselves every day, to apply and be great. So for me, I appreciated those elements in the book, the stories that he brought to life, the connection, what he had to go through, uh, and breaking them into each part of his life into chapters.
Yeah, I love it. And I think it's definitely one of those books that shows you how you can take pain or painful situations and turn it around. And it's one of those kind of fire and brimstone books where you read it and you're like, you're pumped up. You're like, okay, what wall am I going to go kick down? So I definitely think that it's that. So, Steve, I'll let you go first with the fists. With the fists, you give it one, two, three, four, five.
So I'll give it 4.5 fists.
Absolutely, and I would give it four. I would definitely give it four fists. So I think what is that? 4.5 and four is what, four and a quarter average. So I guess it could still be 4.5. So
4 and 2 fingers.
there you go. Right. Four and two fingers.
Just to be clear though, for me, I'm aligned with you but because it is an audio book and the elements of the podcasting after each chapter is what made me give it that extra half fist.
Oh, you know what? That's a good point.
Half fist isn't so much in the body of the work. It's
Right.
more so the other elements he added, which for me I thought was really cool, and gave him that extra half fist.
You know what? With that said, I think I'm definitely going to give him another half fist because you're right. And I've been through a ton of audiobooks, and I think the closest I've seen to something like this is Gary Vee, um, when he does his audiobooks when he goes off script. So,
Right.
and Grant Cardone does that as well, but his was different because it was literally like a podcast episode after each chapter. It was like a 10-minute podcast where he gave details of the story contextually that aren't in the written book. So, Steve, I would say, go ahead and get it. I know I've said a couple times that I think guys would enjoy more than the ladies. I think ladies, it would definitely be inspiration to you.
Don't be discouraged because of his tone or how aggressive he is, because sometimes you have to peel that back to get the message, and the message is worth it.
Absolutely. So, all right. Well, guys, again, this is our episode number 1 of What's in the Word podcast. And we're going to keep on reviewing these books. And hopefully here in the future, Steve, I think that we talk about maybe doing some interviews and some other fun stuff.
Yeah, definitely. Actually, getting some of the authors or people within that industry, or those who have that similar story or experience, and actually bringing them on to talk about what they've gone through, in similar situations, so we can bring some, put some further body, around, what we're doing here. I know reading physical books is tough for a lot of people. That's why we offer up a different format of audiobook. You can listen to it on a plane, you can listen to it in your car, you can listen to it taking a walk or a jog, or just sitting around at home and just letting it play through the speakers. And just content and information is key to growth.
Mm-hmm.
We're going to do our part to make sure we're giving you access into the worlds of, these authors and the stories and the information that they're and the research that they're sharing in these bodies of work. We're going to do the hard part. All you need to do is tune in and listen, and we're going to make sure that we bring it to life so you get as much as you can out of these books.
Absolutely. And do us a favor. If you enjoyed this, we want you to, depending on where you're listening to this, if you're watching this on Instagram, IGTV, but if you're listening on iTunes, go over and leave us a 5-star review. You can only do that, unfortunately, from your laptop or your desktop. They haven't upgraded that to where you can do it from your phone and it actually sticks. If you're on Stitcher, one of the other platforms, do us a favor, take a screenshot and just post it on Instagram and tag at Steve Canal. It's spelled just like it sounds, Steve Canal. Tag at AJ Joyner. That's AJJoiner on Instagram. And let people know that we're reviewing these books, man. We're making it easy. We're reading these books so you don't have to. Anything else, Steve?
No, again, I'm Steve Canal.
And I'm AJ Joyner.
And this is What's in the Word.
All right, we'll see you guys next time.